Hello and welcome to the Spiritually Incorrect podcast with me, your host, Shiv Sengupta. For those who are not familiar with me, I'm the author of the Advaitaholics Anonymous books, Sobering Insights for Spiritual Addicts, and A Manifesto for Spiritual Anarchy, published by New Serum Press. Both these books have had a big impact and found great support among many veteran seekers for their willingness to critique spiritual culture, which can act as a decoy designed to keep our vision perpetually focused away from what is most evident. However, my purpose with the Spiritually Incorrect podcast series is to connect and engage with other writers, thinkers, and spiritual teachers in the industry who don't necessarily fall into the traditional guru stereotype. The idea is to explore some of the topics I covered in my books beyond the realm of my own opinions of the matter. So with that being said, I'd like to welcome three guests who have been on the previous podcasts with me. They are Thompson, Judy, Cohen, and Joan Tollifson. I'll add here that we actually talked thinking we were recording. 10 minutes into it, we found I haven't been recording. So coming back to what we were talking about, and this is really the crux of I think our discussion this far today has been how people are encouraged to present themselves, right? In this spiritually correct manner. And with these podcast series, what I'm trying to do is break some of that stereotype. Try to show people that, there is no one way a person can present themselves that makes them look awakened or enlightened. And I think we were discussing the words prick and cunt when we were talking earlier. So who'd like to take that from there and riff off of that?
So I would like to jump in again, because when you were giving your introduction again for the second time, I thought you said, and I know you didn't, but I thought you said, "This is my podcast with me, your horse."
I probably got it right the first time, but the second time, when you try to repeat yourself.
You probably did not say that, but I was giggling because this word, horse, to possibly describe you, it's an arbitrary little piece of nothing. If you said, "with me, you're cunt," it would be the same. And it's so when we are presenting, here we are, we're having a conversation, we are pretending we know something. And the idea that we're supposed to do that while looking a certain way, that's weird. I wonder how helpful it is for people out there who in the spiritual world or community to have to live up themselves, or to expect the people they listen to have to live up to some image. I wonder about the value of a horse image or a cunt image or any other. I think there can be a great value in celebrating the vast variety of human, and to call any of that wrong or bad, or to say that somebody doesn't have something of value because they're not like Ramana, which I think is the goal that so many people aspire to, that's what they think of when they think of as enlightened, that it's going to look like Ramana.
And I have to give up my investment portfolio?
Up and, take up with a cow, I believe. I just don't know why variety and color and difference isn't exciting.
I think there's a lot of color. I think there's a lot of color and difference in the spiritual world. I mean, if you, one of my favorite people is Nisargadatta, who, smoked cigarettes all through satsang while dying of throat cancer and would yell at people and throw them out. And I think, Ramana's personality was Ramana's personality. And I think most people that I know who are teaching are being genuine in, how they present themselves. But there are people, and I've known one, who, who actually put on a quote spiritual voice that isn't their natural way of speaking. And I know, like when Toni Packer gave talks years ago, she closed her eyes while she was talking, and then other people started doing that. But were they imitating her? Or, like I sometimes do it because it allows you to sort of tune out getting distracted by the visual thing of other people and how they're reacting to you, and to go into a kind of deep place. So people could think, well, you're just imitating Toni, or, it really depends on sort of where the person is coming from, whether, and I just want to say, since we did introduce the prick cunt thing, that, that I feel like, words do have meaning, and they do have, they do have cultural associations and so on. And I don't want to get into a whole discussion of those two words, but and I think, some words are sensitive words, and we need to respect that. And at the same time, people can get too sensitive. And, we were calling each other pricks and cunts before the recording started, and having a lot of fun with it. But I wouldn't, I recognize that particularly the C word can be very hurtful, like the N word or something. And to me, it's different than the word horse. So I just wanted to say that.
What's really interesting to me is, beyond imitating an idea of somebody else or what they're portraying, there's this very human tendency, I think it happens almost unconsciously, to want to recreate something that felt good, that was organic. For example, when we started off the first time, I thought I was recording, we had this incredible spontaneous interaction that was so joyful, and we were pulling each other's legs and just cracking each other up. And then somewhere along the line, I go, oh, wait, guys, I don't think I'm recording yet. And then there's this tendency within us that we're like, oh, well, we'd like to recreate that. Like I feel it within myself. The moment you try to recreate even something that was yours, A, it doesn't feel organic anymore, and B, it doesn't come across as spontaneously. And so there's this tendency for the human mind to constantly, either project into the future or reflect on past, even that could be like 5 seconds past, and want to draw something out longer than it can be, rather than start afresh from wherever you are right now, right? So just wanted to get your thoughts on how that felt, restarting this compared to how we started the first time when we thought we were recording but not recording.
Well, I liked my role better the first time, because the first time I got to start out being outrageous, and the second time I was the one who had to say that, yes, these words do have a meaning. So I had resumed my role on this podcast as, the defender of all the things Shiv is tearing down, which is not really the role I have, actually.
But you're doing a good job. You're being respectful of all sides, which is lovely, and lovely for balance here with this group of skeptical, cynical, a little bit, challengers, all of us, I think, of norms and rules, and it's lovely for balance, Joan. So even if it wasn't your normal position, it was lovely of you to take it.
You're in a new incarnation, Joan. The old one's gone.
The Bardyke or the one who's defending all the traditional things?
Both of them, they're gone.
From Shiv.
That should be your next book, The Bardyke and the Spiritual Teacher.
Oh my God.
Two sides of Joan.
That actually was my idea for my first book. it was, that it was going to go back and forth between the journals I wrote at the Springwater Meditation Center, and then interspersed with this novel I wrote about the lesbian bar where I used to drink, and when I was a drunk, and but the publisher didn't resonate with that idea.
Oh, how
I read your
great.
first book on a plane flying to Colorado. I remember, when you buy a book, it's always a risk, because if you buy 5 books, probably one of them is worth reading. And, Bare Bones Meditation just blew me away by the time I was in Colorado. It was great.
Thank you.
But that was one of those books you take on a flight. But it stayed with me a lot longer than the flight.
That should
was
be on
the first one, right? Bare Bones.
Yeah, Bare Bones Meditation, Waking Up from the Story of My Life. That should be the blurb on the back cover. Great book for a flight.
Well, it's interesting because I know, Joan, you commented, I think on one of the posts, maybe the podcast of ours that I had posted, but you had mentioned how exactly this, that depending on the person you're interacting with, you'll assume a different position. I think that adaptive role is something we all play. So when you're talking to Shiv, who comes from a critic of spiritual culture perspective, you tend to, what's the point in 2 critics agreeing with each other? You'll take the more, okay, well, what's the good stuff happening there kind of perspective. And it's interesting because when I started this podcast series, some of my readers expected, well, this is going to be more of what you wrote about. So you're bringing spiritual teachers on to grill the heck out of them. And then they find that, hey, I seem to be getting along with them. What's this about? Is Shiv switching sides? Is he becoming a spiritual teacher? Has he sold out? And what I try to portray to them is some nuance. Is my role as Advaitaholics Anonymous writing these books is to highlight a certain iconoclastic side to my nature. But that doesn't mean that that's all there is. That's very one-dimensional. And if I do want to have a conversation to deepen my understanding and the understanding of other people through this collaborative conversation, I can't possibly achieve that if I come right out of the gates accusing people of being frauds. So nobody's going to want to engage with anybody that's going to be defensive, say, fuck off, right? So that nuance is lost. And it's funny because the same expectations people have of their gurus, they have of their anti-gurus. They want their anti-gurus to be very much like, oh, this is bad and you shouldn't do this. There's a lack of nuance, right?
Well, there's a desire for performance. I was thinking about that post that you're referring to where whoever that was accused you of being too nice, basically. And I was actually thinking of it while I was brushing my teeth this morning. I was like, what are we, gladiators? We are not here to pick a fight for people's entertainment. And yet that is what they want. They want you to come on and stir up shit so that they can have some fun watching. And I think that kind of one-dimensional, that desire for a one-dimensional person with whether it's their teachers or their speakers or whomever, they want one thing. And it never fails when I give a class, when I have a conversation like yours and mine the other day, last week or whenever, that somebody will say, that's not enlightened. As it never fails, as if there is only one look, one way, one style, one appearance. And so whether you're a guru or an anti-guru, there's a way to do it. And apparently you were failing at the anti-guru approach. And I think that, I don't remember if I said this before the recorder went on or after. So if I'm repeating, I apologize. But there's, for people to not want all of it, to want the angry, crabby guru and the Ramana style and the funny style and the triggered style and is to deprive themselves of all the color and excitement and variety that this world has to offer, and this being a human has to offer. You know, we're not gladiators. You're not a gladiator. If you came in here with your sword, not only would you not have other people volunteering, but think of how tedious that would be after a while. It's just, it's too small. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, well, two things. One is, I think the people who look to others for guidance don't want them to be colorful, because
Right.
colorful is complex. Colorful is not straightforward, clean, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. It's a multitude of contradictions, and that's what life is. And they can't deal with that. They want simplified. So they want their people to
Agreed.
be simplified. They want their messages to be simplified. They want enlightenment to be simplified, all of it. And if you're not portraying a very consistent, everyday, this is the same person I get, they're confused. Like, well, then, you know, this is just as amorphous as my life is, which I can't figure out. If I can't figure out
Surprise.
this person, how can I figure out life? So they
I
want,
think that's really important. They want somebody with the answers, whether they're skeptical and cynical or whether they're an enlightened guru or whatever. They're in many ways giving up their own autonomy, hoping that skeptic or that enlightened teacher will have the answers.
And they want it to be the same every time. So they want, I mean, I remember wondering way back how there could be this much variety in what was called enlightenment. How could there be so much variety? What's the answer? And it was, I think that this whole scene kind of feeds that idea that you're going to find the one who has the answer. I mean, I hear this from clients all the time. I worked with so-and-so and they didn't have it, but then I found Robert Adams and he had it.
Well,
And
that's the
there's
secret of a good cult, is to have the answer, but you have to go all 7 levels to get there. And
damn.
then you get the answer.
yeah,
Oh,
so
good.
you probably just haven't made it
Your
past the
fault,
7 levels.
not the teacher's fault. It's your fault.
This is sounding horribly familiar.
But you know, this is something that's true in many arenas of life. Like if I think about how I present myself at work when I'm on a Zoom meeting with my work colleagues, and especially business meetings with clients and things like that, there's a certain business shift that shows up. When that camera goes off and I'm playing with the kids, completely different human being. I'm like this goofball. I'm hardly a parent. I'm like horsing around with them. And there's this dichotomy. And I don't think the two really merge. So when people are faced with this complex character who takes on so many different caricaturish forms, sometimes almost contradictory, they're like, well, how do I relate to this person? Because we're used to relating to people in specific contexts, right? How do I relate to this person outside of the work context? Because now he's presenting as something entirely different. So who I am as Advaitaholics is completely different than who I am as dad or who I am as, you know, project manager, all of these things. And it reminds me of that quote. I can't remember if it was Walt Whitman or Mark Twain. I'm sure one of you will tell me. But he goes, do I contradict myself? Well, then I contradict myself. Whitman, right? Yeah. I contain multitudes. So, and that's exactly it. And it's almost like we don't want people, or that we want them to contain them, just not display multitudes.
I think it's, you know, really important for spiritual teachers to reveal sort of their different sides.
Agreed.
And because I think one of the big problems in the spiritual world is kind of idealizing people, and it's a natural human thing that we do. I mean, you know, Tony Packer founded the whole center on the idea that she wasn't a teacher, there wasn't going to be an authority. But what you find is that it's in us. We have it, we carry it inside us that, we're looking up to somebody, we're nervous before we talk to them if we're looking up, so it's a human thing, but I think that idealization is not helpful. And so many, I think more and more now, more and more teachers are starting to really openly reveal things about themselves. I know I've done that, certainly, that I've gone through depression and that I've gone through addiction and, that I'm not always feeling great. And, and I mean, there's all kinds of stories about, Zen teachers who died in the bathtub drunk and,
Oh yeah.
teachers, my Zoom meet, teachers who committed suicide. I mean, a number of teachers have committed suicide, and then people think, well, how could they have been on drugs? How could they have committed suicide? How could they have molested a woman? How could they have done this or that? Aren't they supposed to be beyond all that? And it's like we're all human beings, and I think creating that false image of perfection is a real disservice, because then what happens is everybody else feels like, well, I'm not good enough, I have to become better.
Absolutely. To this day, there was a period of time on Facebook where somebody could add you to groups without you even knowing it. And I'm apparently a member of many groups that I didn't know about. And one of them is some group about Alan Watts. And to this day, I never left it because I like Alan Watts. It's fun to see his quotes. Regularly, somebody will say, he wasn't enlightened. He was a fraud. He was a drunk. He was a fraud because he liked women. He was a fraud because he liked drugs. And they don't seem to get the human living with, I hate this language, the non-human, that he could be both, that he could be all of it. And when teachers and spiritual people say, nothing changed for me, I was depressed before enlightenment, I was depressed after enlightenment. There are a few teachers that have come right out and said that. I have a quote from DeMello in my file of quotes. Okay, people, they don't believe him. They insist that it was something in the past that he got over, because if he didn't get over it, then he's not enlightened. There's no way for these folks, there's no way for both to coexist. The human flaws and the human character and the human frailties and the human wacky stuff, and also a connection with the non-human, it's something that I think, even if somebody is honest, they just don't believe. And for people who are seeking, this is holding them back.
I think one of the issues is that Enlightenment culture, for lack of a better term, is based around this fundamental premise of transcendence.
Yes.
And transcendence means, essentially going beyond life. It's not about embodiment, it's about transcendence. And the moment you set that as any kind of goal, then you're already rejecting life as it is. You're saying there is a better existence beyond this duality of life with its ups and downs, its pitfalls and its benefits, all of that. And anybody who seems to have succumbed to the shadow side of life clearly has not transcended life. It's it's an admission of failure. But what I try to reiterate in my writing is that the very premise is flawed. Yes, from the lens of that premise, yes, these are failures. Alan Watts is not transcendent because he was a drunk. But that doesn't, your definition of enlightenment is wrong. Your premise is flawed. The whole point is not to transcend what this is, but to exist in harmony with what is. And what is includes all of it. And to be a completely aligned and harmonious being, you have to be okay with all of it within you. That's the only way you can reflect and resonate with what's outside of you. That's what I keep drawing people to, is forget of awakening, forget enlightenment, forget those peak states. Come to where you are right now. I don't care if you're living under a bridge. I don't care if you're living in a mansion. I don't care if you're doing drugs or you're doing CrossFit. The point is exactly where you are is where it's at. And this, you have to figure out what are all the different dynamics at play here. And that's all part of you, right?
And this is it. This is what we get. And the I think we talked very briefly about this, Shiv, the other day. If we are transcending, what is it that's doing the transcending? It's not consciousness. What would it transcend to? It can only be the human, the self, the character. That's the only thing that can transcend, because existence, consciousness, awareness, whatever name you put on it, that's not shifting. That is what it is. It doesn't shift. It includes everything. What could it shift to that it isn't already? And so I agree with you that it's flawed. If the concept is flawed, if only because it's basically saying it's coming at it from this human perspective and then rejecting the human perspective. So it's confused at best.
I would question, like, maybe, well, first of all, I kind of wonder what we mean, what do we mean by transcendence? Because people may mean, different things by that word. Like, I'm really allergic to the kind of transcendence that you're kind of pointing to, where, Shiv, where we've completely denied our humanity and all of that, and we're just completely, I never resonated with the statement, I am not the body. I mean, but I do resonate with, I am not only the body, and I am not encapsulated inside the body, and the body is not a solid, separate thing the way we think it is, etc. But to say I'm not the body feels, like a kind of denial. So, but there is a kind of transcendence in the sense that it seems to me that at least what spirituality has meant to me in part is about sort of seeing through, waking up from the story and the deeply ingrained sort of thought sense of being separate, encapsulated, caught, hypnotized by these endless thoughts about me, and discovering this kind of bigger context that, and there's a lot of sort of ways that there's a lot of sort of, it feels to me like there's a lot of places on that journey, you can get sort of stuck in being the bigger context or something, but because ultimately it's about being everything and seeing that it's all that, but anyway, so I think it kind of depends on what we mean by transcendence, whether it's something that I resonate with or not.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, music can be a transcendent experience. When I listen to classical music, sometimes I'll be transported. Forget 30 minutes, I have no idea where I am, but I'm just immersed in the music. Art can be transcendent. Being at a musical concert with like throngs of people can be a transcendent experience. But yeah, I think you're right. We need to define what we mean by transcendent, and also differentiate between transcendent experiences, which are momentary, and we all have them, and this idea of a transcendent state that one can perpetually live in. Because I'll ask each one of you, do you experience constant existence without a me thought or a me reference or some sort of self-referential mechanism in the brain? Unlikely. I'm sort of answering for you rhetorically here, but that is unlikely. And yet this myth of people who persist in that pure state of constant transcendence, where every moment feels like being lost in the classical music or an operatic opus for the rest of your life. That is, to me, the myth. Not so much the one-off experiences. Those are beautiful. And I think, people who don't have those transcendent experiences from time to time must live in very dark places. But in a sense, when an addict shoots up heroin into his veins, he's going after that transcendent experience because his mind is not able to create that for him enough to offset the suffering that he experiences in his day-to-day life.
But it seems like there is, at a certain point, perhaps a kind of recognition of this vastness that's always here, this awareness, this presence that is always here. And so if one says, awareness is always here, or, if one is saying it from the perspective that, because initially you sort of feel like you're going back and forth, like I get it, I lose it, I get it, I lose it. And then you sort of notice that anytime you stop and check, it's always here. There's always awareness. Everything is this presence. It's always here. And so in that sense, it doesn't go away. It's always here. But certainly on the level of human experience, on the experiential level, I don't know. I mean, maybe there are people who never have another me thought, but that certainly isn't the case with me. And, and when teachers sort of can't admit that they get defensive or that they get hurt or that they that kind of thing, then that to me is a problem, So again, it kind of depends, I think, what people mean, and that can be misunderstood, Like if Nisargadatta says, I am that.
Transpersonal, that you're, most people do not realize their experience is in a bubble of perception, and they don't know that they're interpreting everything through a me, and making it part of their story or autobiography. And in a moment, to be outside, to have awareness free of that identity, that interpretation, and realize there's a way of being in the world without this narcissistic encapsulation. And that's where things start shifting, is when when awareness suddenly is outside that bubble instead of inside. And a lot of stuff starts falling away, because after a certain point, all of the things we spend so much psychic energy propping up, it's no longer necessary to do that. And it starts dissipating and disappearing. And there's much more connection with other people because we're not defending them. And one of the things you talk about, the spirituality back in the 50s and 60s, what people used to, and still do, is you changed your name to a spiritual name. From now on, I'm not Tom, I'm going to be known as Rama. And you changed your clothes and your haircut. But you're still in that bubble of encapsulation doing it. And a lot of teachers who are very smart and can learn, internalize the game, the Sanskrit, the behaviors, I won't do any Indian gestures or anything, but the whole thing, but it's still that encapsulated process happening. It's just been internalized. So I think there's a lot of importance for awareness to be outside that bubble and to realize how hypnotized we are in that story, that autobiographical self. And that, you can call it transpersonal, it doesn't have to be transcendent. But I think that really does shift a person's way of relating to themselves, the world, and other people when that happens. They're not coming from that narcissistic encapsulation.
So,
but are they always, I think it, it seems to me that that stuff falls away more and more, has less and less of a grip, is less and less sticky, but I would never say it's completely gone,
I think it's not, and I don't think I think it's a awareness, like you say, that's my dog or my car. That doesn't mean you are the car or you are the dog. And so, yeah, we have, Shiv was talking earlier, how he's different with the people he works with his children, that there's a fluidity there. And I think the more there's awareness outside the bubble, the more fluidity there is in every aspect of life. Because we're not trying to prop something up anymore.
I think that some of this confusion comes from the idea that it has to be one or the other, and that you go from one to the other or back and forth at a time. And I think that there's a simultaneous bothness, so that I am Judy always, and also aware, not Judy, outside the bubble as you're describing, Tom. And it's not that I get outside the bubble and I stay outside the bubble. It's not that I hit the Judy realm and stay there. It's that it's both at all times. And so it's, who was I talking to? Walter, I think, in one of these podcasts. It seems to be podcast season. I don't know. But where I was describing an instance many years ago now, where I was having an argument with my then honey. And in the middle of this argument, where I was very angry, I literally was aware of essentially, let's call it a voice. It wasn't obviously a voice that said, "Really, Judy? Really? Really, you're going to stake everything on this? You really? You want to pretend you're angry? Go ahead." And it was both in that moment. I certainly looked angry. And I was also aware of the not angry, and it was both. And I don't know that it's necessary to find our way to one or the other and stay there. And so from that sense, I experience it more like what you're describing, Joan, where it is both. It is angry and not angry. And so then there's no inconsistency. And I think that people in their desperate, really, desire to feel better, want to get to a place where they think they'll stay in that feeling better forever, as if they can abandon the human and it just goes away. And that's just not how it works. We stay all of it, in my experience. We stay all of it. And that enables us to function in this world, to take care of the children, to go to the job, to zip our pants and to drive on the correct side of the road. And also to know that isn't me, and to be all of it. So that would kind of be my sense, which settles it for me. For a while, when I found myself, when my mother was in her last year or two, she had a Lewy body dementia, which it's difficult and it changes the personality, and she was difficult. And this is my mother, so she pressed every button because she put them there. So
she's your programmer.
Right. So it was very difficult. And there were periods where the triggers went off and I reacted, and I would feel like a terrible person afterwards. I would drive home from being with her where she had set me off, and I would drive home thinking, I'm so bad, she's sick, she can't help it. And you know, what happens to the enlightened understanding when you're triggered? It's still there. It's still there, but sometimes we're just human, and sometimes the human wins. And I wonder why it shouldn't. Like, what kind of life would this be if it was only blissful? To me, that sounds tedious.
When I was a child, I was a very emotional child. I'd anger easily, get hurt easily, get upset easily. And I remember being about 7 or 8 and raging at my parents and tears and all of this drama. And then I do a funny thing. I'd dart into the bathroom look at myself in the mirror, giggle through the tears,
Exactly.
then put my upset face back on, and then go right back in there and fully immerse myself in the pain and misery. That separation is quite common in children. They're able to step in and out of the narrative and the story of whatever this is so quickly. Like the younger they are, the faster it is. Somewhere along the way, we lose that tendency as we grow older. And then it becomes about, oh, well, this narrative, this story I'm participating is wrong. How do I step out of it for good? As if that is the goal here, right? And I think it was Jill Bolte Taylor who, in her TED Talk, talks about how one side of the brain shut down. And there's some research into, I'm not sure how scientific or factual this is, but this idea that each hemisphere of the brain has a sense of self.
Oh, for sure. There's lots of science about that.
Yeah, and the more analytical side of our brain has this very condensed sense of self that is functional, that is all, social role oriented and survival oriented, all of that. And then the artistic, creative side of the brain has this open, amorphous sense of self that just bleeds into its environment, because that's how it makes sense of the world. And we're fluctuating between the two, and our social milieu will hyper focus on developing one over the other. But both exist, both coexist. You can't get rid of one. And so then it's this battle of one over the other that rages in a person.
I actually recently, I've got a client who had a series of mini strokes and experienced afterwards a similar situation to Jill Bolte Taylor, and was suddenly experiencing what a lot of people would call enlightenment, as the left side of the brain was damaged. The right side is always there, that holistic, not language, creative as you're deciding. It's always there. It just doesn't have words, and it doesn't need to be heard. Unlike the left side, which is very opinionated and wants to be paid attention to. So part of the science of all this is just so fascinating, is that the right side, the holistic side, is aware and does have a sense of self and observes the left and watches all this, but it doesn't have language to comment. So we are just physically, in the biology, we are both. It's just, and as if the biology, if the meat gets damaged, it becomes clearer that it's always been like that. It's always been both. It's really.
Shift just transcended.
Where did he go? He turned into vapor.
No, he's back. He's back. See, it didn't really last. And that's
You're on your own, guys. I'm sorry.
That's why he has to be this iconoclastic person, because he keeps coming back. See?
It wasn't the real thing.
I was being enlightened by the blinds way too much, and I could barely see you.
I rather liked that, it was kind of like the light flashing around on your face.
My pupils had dilated to the max. They couldn't take it anymore.
I have my lamp that goes on and off spontaneously, so.
I'm feeling very left out. I don't have any stuff that goes on and off. I'm deprived.
I think our culture, we're hemisphere dominant, and that's
for sure.
We're our whole programming and the idea, of integration, of that balance. And so, the things that some teachers teach, like just being silent, gets the other hemisphere, allows its beingness to come into being. And there's the other one commentating, this is a waste of time. Why am I doing this? I've got things to do. But if we just relax enough, that other part of our being can come in wordlessly into the conversation. So we are, especially in the West, very hemisphere dominated. And that's the one that, from we get up in the morning through our days, just being reinforced. And it's what's looking for that enlightenment experience within its own domain.
Isn't that funny that we use the left side of the brain, the side of the brain that can't do it, says that it wants the holistic experience, which is not its part, it's not its venue, it's not its purview, venue, it's not its thing. It belongs to the other side of the brain. So it's like, to use language spiritual people relate to maybe a little more, it's the ego saying it wants to be egoless. Like, no, it doesn't.
According to its definition.
Yeah, it's saying, change me, change life. I want to be different. But
I want to be an enlightened ego.
It's what's saying that. That's not what it wants.
I remember on my long search for final enlightenment, at some point, I just really got that, wait a minute, this is all about me. This is all about
right.
me
That's
getting to some
realization
place in the future. And, but like what you were saying, Judy, I think, what you finally notice really is that they're both here right now, like we're seeing multiplicity and unity at the same time. Like in this very moment, we're seeing a lot of apparently discrete separate objects, and we're seeing it all as one whole picture, one whole field. We're actually experiencing these two realms, relative and absolute, if you want to call it that, simultaneously all the time. But we're just, because we're so focused, our conditioning is so focused on the one, we just ignore the other, even though we're actually experiencing it constantly.
That's a very important, that's an essential point, that we're experiencing both. But the commentator, it's not showing up the way the commentator thinks it should. So it's saying, well, I need to do more. I have to read another book, go to YouTube.
The commentator says, this isn't it.
Yeah, right.
And
Joan says, this is it. This can't be it.
right. And meanwhile, again, if we just keep it strictly biologically, the left side can't do what the right side does. So it's the left side saying, this isn't it, when it has absolutely no freaking idea. And it's all there. And unless the brain is damaged, it's all happening.
So can I make a quick ad for meditation? Correct meditation. The research of 50 years has shown it enhances the energy of both hemispheres and gets them to integrate and balance. So there's no longer a hemisphere dominance. They're both, it's not like one's suppressed and the other's energized. They're both energized and integrated. And so the value of correct meditation is you're getting the full activity working together instead of one dominating the other.
But what is correct meditation?
Well, you need to find a teacher who knows that often a technique is needed in the beginning, a method, a focus like the breath, but you want to let that go as soon as you can. So correct meditation is ultimately doing nothing, but until you're able to relax into letting everything be as it is, most people need a technique. It's like in Zen, and I think this is an outstanding technique, actually, counting the breath, the exhalation. And if you lose count, you start again. You get to 10, you start again. But then you go into shikantaza, which is just sitting, allowing everything to be as it is, including your thoughts and feelings. But if you go into that too early, then all you're doing is sitting there thinking. Most people think meditation's thinking with their eyes closed.
Well, yeah, so basically this, essentially what you're referring to is a sort of trained spontaneity, starting from a state where mind is very controlled by a certain hemisphere dominant approach, and slowly training it to step by step let go. Theoretically, that makes sense on some level. The problem I have with this kind of spiritual practice is that it appeals to one side of the brain. The part of your brain that is already free-flowing doesn't need to get there. It already is. The part of the brain that wants to be let go and be more spontaneous is the part that's getting there. Therein lies the issue, is because that part will never get there. So it's going to keep trying. And I experienced this early on in my life when I had a 30-year meditation practice. And I'd meditate. At one point I was meditating 4 to 6 hours a day, but I'd set aside time for meditation. So it'd be like, my schedule would be go to school, this, do your homework, whatever, meditate. And the brain can't let go on a schedule. It can't be creative and free if there's a certain time for it to be free. Here's free play time. This is like on the school curriculum, there's time for free play. Well, now go be free. I don't know how to be free. The whole day I've been following your schedule. I'm kind of oriented that way. I can't just be free on demand. And there's this expectation when we sit down to meditate, okay, now this is time where we get to be free. And that itself becomes a detriment and sort of impediment to that cultivation of that mindset.
It can be if it's not understood correctly. But that freedom, like you said, is there all day long. The minute a task stops, there's the resting and freedom. And so again, people, without a doubt, people get addicted to techniques and methods within meditation because that part of the brain is a doer. It wants something to do. But with proper instruction, that's not allowed to happen. You start resting more and more in awareness, effortless awareness, and then you start noticing that's happening throughout the day. That this presence of awareness becomes a default state instead of the mind chatter.
I just want to say,
Unnecessary mind chatter.
go ahead. You finished.
That's all.
Oh, well, I kind of resist these words like correct or, good instruction, correct instruction, because, well, first of all, I feel like everyone's unique and people are going to resonate with and need and open up with very different approaches. And, having tried a lot of different forms of meditation myself, I know that some of them really work for me and some of them really didn't. But they worked for other people, and by worked, I mean, they facilitated some sort of seeing through delusion and waking up to that kind of more freer place. And I know when Tony Packer, didn't offer any kind of method, and she just said, just sit down, see what happens, kind of, but she did talk a lot about seeing if we could find the me who's supposedly doing everything. So, but anyway, I don't want to get into that, but I mean, I think, I just kind of come down on both sides of it, both what you're saying, Shiv, and what you're saying, Tom, just that I guess this is me playing my role again, the balanced one.
Thank you.
I will.
I'm
going back to my right brain now. Goodbye.
It sets us free to be obnoxious because you've got the good guy handled.
Well, and I also realize, when it comes to promoting meditation in a sort of method that's correct through instruction, Tom's going to be outnumbered on this podcast, so we need some balance so that we're not overwhelming the conversation with one perspective. And okay, in Tom's defense, I'd like to provide an analogy where I don't know if you ever watched this show, America's Next Top Model.
What
you
is
ever
it?
watch it? America's Next Top Model. It was a show hosted by Tyra Banks about the fashion industry, and all these contestants go and to learn how to be models.
Of Shiv, I think America's Next Top Model.
And this is what I mean, like the multitudes. So this is something.
I watched The Bachelor and The Bachelorette at one point.
Yeah, and I did too. So I used to meet up with my girlfriends, well, my friends who were girls back in college, for girl for girls' night to watch America's Next Top Model, the only guy in there. Ended up marrying one of them. But we'd have America's Next Top Model nights every Wednesday night. And I remember Tyra explicitly saying to contestants who came from a dancing background as professional dancers, that learning to walk on the runway was so much harder to teach to someone who is a dancer than someone who's a novice. Because walking on the runway requires your body to be completely fluid and limp. And you've seen how those supermodels walk on the runway, just flopping around like ragdolls. Whereas dancers are very muscular and hyper body aware. And so they're always posturing wherever they walk. And there's a certain tautness to their physique. And she said, that's the opposite of what we want on the runway. We want you to sort of flop around as you're with attitude and like you don't give a shit on the runway. And the dancers struggled with this because their whole dancing conditioning taught their bodies to be sort of postured in a certain way. So in that sense, if in a culture in which our minds are taught and conditioned to be so strongly postured in left brain kind of thinking, and I would compare how European cultures operate to how indigenous cultures operate, and how this European mindset, social mindset, has really taken over the globe at this point. Everyone functions it that way because it is so results oriented, right? It tangibly, you set goals, you achieve results, and you grow, and there's this constant need for growth. Whereas indigenous cultures were not interested in constant expansion and growth and conquest. They were more on this repeat cycle of the seasons and life and circle of life, and how to coexist with that environmental setup, the cyclical setup. And in that sense, I feel like maybe indigenous cultures had a bit more of that balance between the left and right brain self projection. And maybe for a culture as one-sided and biased as ours, some sort of mechanisms may be needed to help offset that. I'm not sure. Like theoretically, like I said, Tom's proposal sounds like, okay, if you could find a technique that slowly eases a person, weans them off of that, it might work. But at the same time, I don't know how practical that is, whether that actually.
Well, here's the other
would work.
spiritually correct thing I'm going to say is you need a good teacher who can know where you're at and guide you, because the tendency of the mind, even with meditation, is to be the doer. And you have to, at a certain point, start letting that go and just rest in what Krishnamurti called choiceless awareness. But initially, when people rest in choiceless awareness, they're thinking. And so
I'm still thinking.
I am too, and I have to say, and I know
the possibility is at a certain point when one's working with this correctly, the brain integrates and balances, and there is this aware presence, and the commentator, if it's there at all, is in the background, or it's not. It's that secondary process is gone, and so it is. Like a lot, there are good Dzogchen teachers out there, there are good Zen teachers out there, people, but it's not something you can pick up a book, because like dancing, like tennis, in the beginning you may be very awkward playing tennis, or what I know a little bit about is martial arts. If you're thinking when you're doing martial arts, you're going to be the person on the floor looking up all the time. There has to be a faster than thought, spontaneous, fluid dance to be so-called successful. Same thing in meditation is there's not a doer of meditation, but you have to authentically get there.
But here's the thing, if I might, Tom.
Sure, go ahead.
There may not be a doer, and yet you are asking people to allow everything to be as it is. What exactly does that mean? How does a non-doer allow anything?
It already is.
Well, I know that, but this is your expression. I am allowing everything to be as it is. And you have to let things go. Again, I write things down because I
When
have
when
brain.
the brain is integrated, that's a spontaneous awareness.
Yes, but it's not a doing. And so when you say,
Right.
these are your words, right? You have to let things go. That implies
I didn't
a
say that.
power. You did. I wrote it down.
Okay, you allow things to be as they are. You
How
don't
does
have
one do that?
Can
the
I?
brain. The
What does
brain
that mean?
integrates.
Okay. Are things what they are, whether you allow them or not?
Can I jump in?
Sure.
It seems. Can I jump in? It seems to me that you know, telling, instructing or whatever people, inviting people to allow things to be what they are is a kind of. It's a kind of. You know, you have to sometimes say things that you could pick apart.
Well, I don't know. I just
wait a
don't
minute.
know
Wait
what
a
it
minute. Wait a minute.
means.
Judy. Wait a minute. Just as a kind of, you know, invitation, you know, and what you, of course, eventually discover is that everything already is allowed to be as it is, obviously, because it is as it is. But you kind of.
But it's an
like,
authentic discovery.
Yeah, and I kind of, you know, I mean, I'm an enthusiast for meditation. The only thing I was kind of objecting to is the notion that there's only one correct kind of meditation, and I don't think you have to have a teacher. I think, you know, it can be helpful to have a teacher, but I don't think that everybody has to pick it up that way. I mean, and we don't even have to call it meditation, but you know, to give, like, okay, one of my teachers, Charlotte Joko Beck, one of her techniques was labeling your thoughts, and she had you use a whole sentence label, like having the thought that Bill is a jerk. And what you notice when you're doing this is that you really notice that it's a thought, you know, because if you're just thinking Bill is a jerk, it kind of feels like an objective report on reality. But when you have to then say, having the thought that Bill is a jerk, you know, you really get. But for me, it didn't work at all because I'm a writer. And so I kept getting obsessed with writing the perfect label. So, you know, Joko said, just drop that, don't do it. You know, and I'm just giving that as one example that there's like a lot of different types of meditation, a lot of different things. And I think different things are helpful to different people. And I kind of resist seeing any of it as the only correct way or that you need.
Well, I agree. When I use the word correct, I mean, you're not getting somebody addicted to a method or technique. That it's ultimately meditation is not a doing, it's an allowing, it's a being that happens by the neural process of the brain and the nervous system going into a state of integration and rest.
But
And
it's
so
already
again, using
integrated.
words to describe something that's a wordless process is tricky business. By correct, I mean most people become addicted to their method or technique because the thinking mind is a doer. So it doesn't want.
In my experience, allowing or resisting or any of these intentional activities are sort of
they happen.
Yeah, sure, but it's a bit of a mind game when you set out to do them intentionally. But I'm going to sit for the next hour and try to allow. However, what I've noticed in my own experience is that the only thing that happens is either recognition or not recognition, and both happen spontaneously. There are moments when I don't recognize that everything is what it is. I'm like very much in the one frame of mind of, oh, I'm going to get this done, and that asshole screwed me out, and I'm see what I'm going to do about it. And then there are moments where something will snap and be like, it is what it is. Mm-hmm. Neither of those happens intentionally. In that moment when I'm, focused on that asshole and what he did to me and how I'm going to get him back. If I sat and said, oh, but I already know it is what it is, so let me switch into it is what it is recognition mode, I can't do that intentionally. That happens spontaneously. And if I set out to do that intentionally, what I end up doing is recreating something that looks like a moment in which that recognition happens spontaneously. Much like we were trying to recreate that first unrecorded moment of that cheerful banter between us the second time around. And I don't have an issue with what Tom is positing as a technique for correct meditation, all of that, even though I take, objection to some of those terms, or that a person can lead you through it, the right master, all of that. My question is, how do you, through a deliberate method, teach someone to be spontaneous? It's almost counterintuitive.
But I think, in fact, we do teach things like martial arts. We do teach things like meditation. We do teach
football,
like learning to dance, and maybe you start out, it is very artificial, but the kind of meditation that has been most meaningful to me is kind of less about, it's not about trying to do something. It's really about seeing what is happening, if seeing that the mind is resisting what is, or seeing that the mind is trying to allow everything to be as it is, or, just seeing what's going on. And I think it's just part of the way that it unfolds, that in the beginning, you do get caught up in all these sort of false turns, like trying to make it happen and all this stuff. And then if you stick with it, you kind of eventually begin to see that that's happening. So and then the seeing of it, it kind of falls away when you really see. It's like me when I was on my great quest for the final enlightenment, and I began to really see that it was all about me. Wait a minute, this is all about me. The seeing of that allowed it to just drop away, not necessarily the very first time I saw it, in a big flash or something.
So it dropped away spontaneously.
Yeah, but I mean, this is a story of cause and effect, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, I feel like meditation has been very helpful to me in seeing how the mind works, and in opening up to that kind of more spacious, more free.
So I guess the question isn't whether meditation is beneficial. I don't think that's I don't think any of us are really arguing that here. Within the martial arts, dancing, meditation, these are all very useful within specific contexts. Martial arts is a combat context. So teaching a person first skill, and then how to be spontaneous within a combat scenario, I can understand there's a technique to getting there. Similarly with dancing, first you learn, you look awkward when you're dancing. Finally, you're just fluid. All your creativity is coming through the skill and technique you've learned. Same is true for music. Meditation can do that as well within specific contexts that we might say, meditating to, let's say, regulate the body within extreme cold and heat temperatures. People can train themselves to do that. But when we get into spirituality, the context suddenly becomes all of life. And how do you use a technique to become spontaneous in all of life? Like, this is such a grand scope we're talking about, right?
I think also
technique disappears.
Wait, Tom, let me get a word in. I think that when you use language like allowing everything to be as it is, advertently or inadvertently, the message is the meditator has power, has the ability to allow. And that encourages a sense of self that is not helpful. And I don't know, even if you meditate, I am not a fan of meditation. I have no problem with you're doing it. I don't. So it's not that I have any problem with it. I just don't know why I need to balance a brain that is already balanced. Again, unless there is a physical damage to I think it's called the corpus callosum, which connects the two parts of the brain, it's already balanced. Whether I know it or not doesn't matter. It's still balanced.
But Judy, it does matter in the sense that if it, I think that's what our suffering is a lot, what may motivate us to take up something like meditation, because we are really totally believing our thoughts, but we are totally caught up. And so
understood, but we don't need to know. In other words, do I need to know consciousness in order for consciousness to be? No. Do I
No.
need to understand what's happening in order to change what's happening? Also, no. Existence does what it wants. And
Well, but Judy, I mean, I would say that what we do as human beings is part of how the universe is moving. It's part of what is, you know. So and like this whole question of whether there's the power to, like, do we have the power to allow? It gets into this whole issue of free choice, which is a really interesting issue. And I mean, and I tend to come down on the no free choice side
me
of it.
too.
But I actually think, you know, that you can't put reality into either of those concepts, and that there is an ability here to allow and to open.
I don't agree.
It's the ability that the universe has to do that. The ability
but
that
not
consciousness
us.
has. It's not, you know, it's not the thinking mind, which, you know, that has the ability to do that. But there is an ability here that can be tapped into, just like there's an ability here to pick up this glass.
Or write a
what
book.
is doing that?
Okay, so I am a writer, a painter, and a dancer. I don't do any of those things.
What things?
I don't write. When I'm writing gets done. I'm not doing it. When I paint, I'm not the painter. And so when I sit down, this was to me, this is faulty thinking, in my opinion. This idea that attempting to allow existence to do what it's going to do, whether I allow it or not, doesn't take into consideration that when you had that idea, Joan, that when you suddenly saw that you were not your thoughts and that you were thinking and et cetera, that came to you. You did not make that happen. I don't know that there's any amount of allowing we can do. I don't even know quite what it means when we say allow everything to be what it already is. What exactly does that expression mean?
And the question, okay, so the good way to approach that, what does it mean, is who does it benefit? Who does it benefit?
Who does it?
Right. And
I think
so let's ask that question. Who does it benefit? Who does it benefit to see everything as it is? Who does it benefit to allow it to be? Whose suffering becomes reduced through the process of seeing what it is? And
so
it
that's
really
not
always
what
comes
I'm
back.
saying, Shiv.
No, the question I'm asking is, if we put the question that way, the only answer it seems to point to is that personal self, that figment of our imagination is the one who appears to benefit. Because if I reflect again, and I tend to do this a lot on my children, for example, their lack of awareness of their own functioning, of their own perception, is in a sense a kind of freedom.
Mhm.
They're able to be spontaneous because they have no idea whether they are being spontaneous or not. And I have found that when we create this, allowing, seeing what is, all of this as goals, even if they're subtle goals, even if they're, small benefits we want to recognize, the only person that really benefits is that sense of who I am, not who I actually am, not the impersonal self. The impersonal self is impersonally related to what is happening. It has
does
no
not need
such
to allow.
preferences. Right.
It does not need to allow. So you've taken this to who does it benefit, but I'd love to come back to the question of who does it? Who or what does the allowing?
Well, that could be a question that you would look at in meditation.
Well, whether you do it or not, I'm asking you, because these are expressions you guys are using. What does the allowing? Because when I sit down, if I sit down and a meditation teacher says to me, allow everything to be as it is, when it already is, and my allowing it or not has absolutely irrelevant, useless.
So I would say just notice that the thoughts you're having now, that this is useless, It's already happening. I don't need to do this, and allow those thoughts to be here.
What does
And
that mean? I'm
just-
asking you, what does it mean? Allow it.
Well, I
I'm
think it's
asking.
something I'm okay.
means
I
not
think
to
it's
get
something
fixated.
I think it's something that you have to discover experientially. I don't think we can kind of put it into
I
words.
think that's a cop-out.
No, I don't think it is.
You
because-
guys are using an expression. It is.
Well,
if I'm
Judy, listen,
Yes.
if I say, pick up this glass, Joan, pick up this glass, who am I talking to? I mean, come on, there's nobody here. Who am I talking to? But I can still say, pick up this. And if I'm raising a kid, I can say, look both ways before you cross the street. Who am I talking to? They're either going to look or they're not. There's no
But you're
point
not
in telling
saying to
them
the kid,
because they're
allow
going to
the-
do whatever they do.
But Joan,
And
those
what
are
the
those
fuck?
are not
Whatever
examples.
they do is what is. So who the fuck cares, But
Okay.
see, the thing is, you're still going to tell them because this is also part of what is. You're
Are we
going
going
to
to
tell
have
them,
a
look
conversation,
both
or
ways.
are we only going to talk about what we agree about, or are we going to actually have a conversation? I am actually asking you guys. When you say to a kid,
I'm telling you.
wait, let me finish. When you say to a kid, look both ways, that's different from saying, allow the traffic to be as it is. I am asking you what allow means. I don't know why you can't answer.
I'm saying
You don't want to
that
hear.
allow
That's
me-
why. You
there's
don't
certain
want
I
to
don't
hear.
find
Your
your
mind
answer-
is made up that it's a
No.
stupid thing to say.
No, my goodness. I'm actually
It is.
asking a question and I'm not
So,
getting an
so
answer.
the way I understand Judy's question is this: does the child have the option not to allow traffic to flow as it is, or does the child believe or are we implying to the child in some way that they have the possibility to resist
That is
what is
indeed my
happening,
question.
and therefore there's a way not to resist, and that's the way I would understand the word allow is don't resist, not to resist the moment. And if there is a way to not resist the moment, is that a real non-resistance, or is that just another learned behavior?
Well,
That was
I
my
think there is a
question.
learning involved in this kind of work. I mean, I think it is a learning process. So, yeah, I mean, to me, it just means it's just a pointer to it's just a pointer to what allowing, accepting, not resisting, whatever shows up. So if you're having a feeling of tension in the body, the initial impulse of a meditator might be, this isn't good, I shouldn't be tense. So it's counteracting that by saying, just allow the tension to be there.
But in allowing the tension to be there, aren't you in a sense resisting the tension?
Well, I
We're
mean,
getting
this could
caught
be a
in
big
words
mental
instead
game.
of
Well,
expressing.
and the reason I'm bringing this up is whatever it's pointing to, and this is something I brought up in my writing, I think it's an awful fucking pointer. Okay, it is one of the most confusing pointers and one of the most misunderstood pointers in spirituality, which is why we have a culture of people passive aggressively being spiritual. They mistake pacifism for real peace because they try to dumb down the entire experience of life in this goal of allowing things. So it becomes this attitude of complete permissiveness, which is, I don't think, what is being pointed to at all, right? It's not about, right?
But that's a misunderstanding of, I mean, any pointer, any phrase we use can be misunderstood, taken the wrong way, and obviously it's a pointer that doesn't resonate or work for either of Judy
so
or
what you're
Shiv,
saying,
but that doesn't mean that it, like for me,
it's
a
not,
powerful pointer.
yeah, and it's not even a question of what it's pointing to. I would argue, from my perspective, I'm big. This is really enjoyable for me because I don't have to play bad guy on this podcast. You guys are going at it, and it's great. This is good. I think this is so beneficial for seekers out there to see these different perspectives, because that's what's going on already in their minds, and they're denying one side or the other. This is why I think this is a great conversation. But my question to you is, in a sense, isn't Judy's radical position where she says, how can
I don't think
the
hers is
person So hold on. Isn't it, in a sense, radical position about saying, how can a person even allow actually encouraging people to just give up this trying to manage life and, in effect, becoming more allowing, if anything? Because I noticed this about myself as well through my whole life. There's this mechanism within the brain of constant hyperactive self-management. It's you're perpetually watching yourself in action and trying to course correct all the way through your life.
Process,
allowing,
right?
Sorry?
That's a secondary process going on.
That's a secondary process. And what happens is with pointers, they just get co-opted by that secondary process. That becomes another thing. Now, am I allowing? Am I not allowing? How do I allow better? It becomes that. And that undercuts the whole point of that pointer. And in a sense, when you, I think what not Lucy, but Judy, sorry, what Judy is suggesting
I've been called
is that
Lucy before.
Okay, in another lifetime, perhaps a different incarnation. Right?
I think they're thinking of the Peanuts Lucy.
Okay, is to say that secondary process is fucking broken. It does nothing for us. And the moment you give a pointer of this kind, it just becomes more fodder for that process to then fuel itself on. So I guess the point
change
here is
your
not,
neurology, and then that falls away.
so how do you, okay, so you're suggesting one can intentionally change their neurology with a master present who's going to manipulate that neurology?
I don't like the word master, but I think a good teacher, if you want to learn the martial arts or tennis or music, having a great teacher who actually knows what they're doing is extremely beneficial. The body is an instrument, and when the instrument is used certain ways, it gets different results. When you start learning a martial art, it can be very, very difficult. And your teacher can say, someday, this will happen spontaneously in a state of flow, and you won't even know what's happening. And when that happens, and I think Joan's experienced this because you've studied martial arts, it's a miraculous thing that a very complex process is happening without that secondary process. But it requires a training, a shifting of the neurology, the functioning of the human mechanism, the body. And in like any other training, it's not an intellectual thing. I can't sit here and think about how to play a guitar. That's not going to help me play a guitar. I have to actually pick up the instrument and start experimenting, hopefully with guidance. Same thing with the brain and the nervous system, the whole 9 yards, is there are certain things that, yes, can intentionally be done that shift what's going on in the body until at a certain point, there is a flow of awareness without the secondary process.
And I think that's something we've all experienced. Right?
Or spiritual.
No, you're right. It's purely physiological. And we experience this in everything, like driving, for example, those of us who drive. I mean, when we first
when you start driving, you're not there.
Right. My question is, you know, I'm not arguing that within the context of driving or within the context of walking or within the context of dancing or martial arts or playing the guitar or art or any of these functions we perform within very narrow contexts. My question is, how do you teach someone to life like that if lifing were a verb? How can you teach someone to actually operate unanimously through every scenario in their life in that state, where as if they have learned life, they perfected life, because that's what we're talking about.
See, those are dangerous words to use. What happens is that effortless, I won't say effortless, the flow is happening without the secondary commentary. So whatever is going on
in your life, you're going to encounter scenarios you've never been in before. Like, let's say, you know, you're living at, it's a normal everyday where, you know, you're picking up the mail, you're doing things you're accustomed to doing, right? In that scenario, yeah, you can be fairly mindless about it. You could just, your body's on automatic mode because it's done this a million times.
You know, See,
No, I don't mean
you're
mindless in that
adding
sense, but
things that aren't there. You're not mindless. You can learn. You can go learn Spanish. It's not a problem. You can learn.
So
job, you
I'm
can
giving you
learn-
2 examples. I'm giving you 2 examples. One is a day when you're not learning it, like you just sort of mundane things happen. Another is a day when something unexpected happens and requires you to be engaged in a way because you've never encountered this scenario before. In that sense, in that scenario, your brain is going to be engaged. It's going to start troubleshooting. It's going to start selfing. It's going to do all those
It'll
things
do it
brains
better
are
than ever.
designed to do. Right. But we seem to be projecting this idea that a human being can operate flawlessly through
No.
life.
No, who's saying that? I'm
Well,
sure
we're
as
talking
hell
about
not
it.
saying
We're
that.
talking
Joan.
about but through what Tom is saying about this fully integrated brain, where one is allowing what happens all the time. Isn't that what we're saying?
No,
I
there's
didn't-
nobody there allowing what's happening is happening.
Okay, but the allowing is happening of its own accord, right? Regardless of whether someone's allowing or the allowing is allowed to happen. My question to you is that within a scenario in which that the context within which we have developed a mastery, such as driving or martial arts, one can say, yes, now my body is moving of its own accord. But there are scenarios in life when that doesn't happen. And so my question to you is, life is the mother of all context. And to suggest that one can operate in that larger context in life in a similar manner seems to imply that there's a certain number of techniques you can learn to get perfect at mastering life.
I don't think we're talking about
The word
perfection.
yeah, go ahead.
Wait,
Joan.
can I don't think we're talking about perfection, but it does seem to me that over the course of my life, through many things that I've done, such as psychotherapy, the work of Byron Katie, meditation, a host of things that I've done, that there's less tendency to get caught up in thoughts that are not particularly useful, like, I've ruined my whole life, or I need to get enlightened, or whatever those thoughts are. There's less tendency to be bamboozled by that kind of thinking. There's more enjoyment of life and just sort of a capacity to be more open. But I wouldn't say perfection. It's not like, now.
What's that word even mean?
Well, my
Yeah.
question to you is, how do you know that's not a function of your age and maturity? And
Well, I'm sure that's a piece of
Right,
it.
right.
Anytime we try to put things into a story of cause and effect, who knows? But
Well, you're doing that.
I'm speaking of my experience, what has felt useful to me. So I feel very grateful for all those things because I feel like they've been helpful. I feel like this life has been changed in helpful ways. I was once a down and out drunk. I nearly killed myself. I went through depression that was not pleasant, etc. So I've been very grateful for these things that have been helpful. Now you could say, well, what the fuck? Just be a drunk. Just be depressed.
But I don't think that's what we're saying.
And and don't do anything about it. Just do that.
Who is saying that?
And well, that's kind of what I'm hearing. Like, why?
Okay,
why
so
That's not what is
why-
being said.
Well, let's
Okay.
approach it. Let's approach it this way. I think the 4 of us, no matter what sort of direction we're heading at this from, I think we can all four agree that where we are in our lives right now compared to our past is vastly improved if we were to look at it in that historical sense of our own personal stories. And we have 4 very different paths to getting there. Tom has been along that more traditional approach of spiritual, meditative techniques, and we had different teachers along the way, and comes from a more traditional background. Joan, you're a little bit more non-traditional, but still, you've had teachers like Tony Packer and influences like that. Judy comes from a much more non-traditional perspective.
No,
She also
Judy
has
was with Byron. Judy was with Byron Katie. Judy was with Scott Killaby, and now is
don't-
not with those people anymore, but is offering something herself that offers to help people wake up in some way and they're suffering.
Please do.
Well, I read your website and it says that.
It does not. It does not. I would never, no, check again. I am very careful not to use words like that. I'm extremely careful not to use
Well,
words
You
like
charge?
It says something about,
Just-
that your
Yeah,
repertoire.
that.
so
You
what-
guys, I've been really careful to not interrupt you, but you have not given me the same.
And
If
I
you're
also
going
want
to
to just, I also want to make a little caveat here, sorry, that I think what would be productive to this conversation is if we don't go down to the level of personal
Yeah, I would
attacks or
appreciate
insults
that
and all of that.
very
So
much.
let's keep it to the level of our own personal experiences and this conversation from that
I
perspective.
do not offer people a way to enlightenment. And I
No, I
also
didn't say
don't,
that.
well, you kind of did,
Oh,
but
I did.
I will say that I also don't attribute what may or may not have happened or what I've learned or what has come to me to a cause the way you guys seem to attribute to meditation or to various techniques. I'm not attributing causation in the way that you guys are. And I think that I understand that I kind of more go to what you were saying, Shiv, that who's to say that the realizations that you came to, Joan, wouldn't have come whether you had done Byron Katie's work or meditated or not. So,
Or being an alcoholic.
or been a, yeah, I just don't know
Personally.
the value in saying, but it doesn't matter. I don't need to argue that, but I just, I think that there are many different approaches, and I think that there are many ways to end up in the same place. I don't know that we have done it. And I think that for me, the idea that I can meditate and get something is, I want to pick my words extremely carefully. I don't find value in that approach.
Well,
And
good
I think-
meditation would be, if you're meditating thinking you're going to get something, meditation is all about, seeing through that thought and, seeing that tendency of the mind.
Okay.
So,
I'm not a fan.
So I think
And I
So,
don't think anybody should do anything. I don't care what anybody does. I'm
I think it's
simply
the-
saying scientific facts of 50 years of research show these things occur.
mhm.
attributing cause to how life pans out, I think, is part of the problem. We all have our preset biases of how we'd like to make sense of how we got to where we are now, right? We have a life story and we interpret it in a certain way. I think I don't want to underplay or put down the benefits of meditation. This is not my point here. What I do feel, however, that spirituality tends to overemphasize the benefits of meditation in a way that nothing else is as effective as allowing a person to mature into the kind of insights Joan today enjoys compared to the Joan of the past, for example. And I can tell you, I had a meditative background at some point of time, but most of my spiritual growth or evolution, if you want to call it, has happened in my post-meditation era through the
How do you
actual
know
living
that?
of, well,
How do you-
again, this is another,
Since you're denying.
I don't
Since you-
know that.
Okay.
This is the point. I don't know that. It appears to me in that sense, that that's how I make sense of it. This is very important, right? So when I talk to people, all I ever say is, this is how it was for me. That's it. I do not offer a technique. I do not say this is the way it is done or this is the way it happens. Or none of that, because I do not know that. All I know, all I am privy to is what has not expired or conspired, but happened in the duration of my limited lifetime. I'm 40 years old, fucking speckle on the grand scheme of humanity and existence.
Mere
itself.
child.
Yeah, mere child. But I have literally experienced just 40 years in a blink, and I've formulated all kinds of assumptions and understanding of this fucking thing we call life, which is so much beyond our scope of understanding. And so the least I can do is say, okay, based on what I've seen and based on the way I approach it with my understanding, this is what appears to have happened for me. And based on that understanding, I will also say things like, I don't think there is an objective technique that you can apply that works for people. Do I know that as a complete absolute fact? No, I don't know that. It doesn't make sense to me. And that's all I can say. So I can only offer my opinion, right, on the matter, not any sort of, neuroscientific facts. And I don't think they exist, despite what Tom is saying about, 50 years of neuroscience proving that meditation can.
Oh,
There's some benefits for sure.
It's well documented. There were warehouses of documentation.
On the benefits of meditation, yes. On allowing a person to become purely spontaneous, I would argue that. Regardless, I think, we've all had a really productive discussion here. I've actually really enjoyed it. You guys feel like family at a Christmas dinner because this is exactly
Thanksgiving.
This is exactly how we will go to war with each other over the turkey's in the middle and we're battling each other. And what the fuck are you talking about? Political opinions. But at the end of the day, what is most important, I feel, is for viewers to see that there's so many passionate approaches to this that, I don't want, from my perspective, I'm right, obviously. I wouldn't be saying it. But does that mean Tom is therefore absolutely wrong? Joan is wrong, Judy is wrong? Obviously not. This is my lens on this, my little quarter of a window on the whole screen. And each of you just occupy a quarter of the window because Joan wanted to set it up that way. She didn't want one person to occupy the whole window. I think that's really beneficial. So I think, this is a good time to wrap things up, but I highly appreciate that we all had this discussion. And if you'd be up for it, maybe sometime in the future, we can do a round two. And you guys can.
Well, Shiv, I really appreciate you giving us this opportunity to be together and for me to get to know Judy and Joan, even though I've known Joan and you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Appreciate you being here. And thanks again, Judy and Joan. And we'll keep you up to date on what's happening with future podcasts.
Yeah, we'll have to do this again.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Shiv, and everyone. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Judy. Great to know you. Shiv,
Great to
Joan.
meet you, Tom.